When he left, he made sure to take everything that glittered. The life we had built together, or rather, the life I had paid for while he dreamed, was dismantled piece by piece. He took the flat-screen TV, the leather sofa that still smelled new, the savings account I had so carefully nurtured. He even took the dog. But in his rush to strip me of a future, he forgot about a past I barely remembered myself. He forgot about a derelict barn, tied to a collapsed farmhouse, on a piece of forgotten land my father had hidden in my name. And what I found there wasn't just about reclaiming what was lost. It was about discovering what was meant to be found all along. If you've ever had to start over from scratch, with nothing but the clothes on your back and a hole in your heart where your trust used to be, then this story is for you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what it really means to rebuild from the ground up. The first week was a blur of gray. The color of the city sky, the color of the worn-out sofa I was sleeping on in my friend Sarah's apartment, the color of the feeling inside my chest. Numbness. It was a strange kind of shield. The pain was there, a vast, cold ocean beneath a thin sheet of ice, but I couldn't let myself break it. If I did, I knew I would drown. I was 23 years old, and I felt like my life had already ended. 2 years with Marcus had hollowed me out, leaving behind a shell that looked like a person but felt like a vacant building. He had been my son, and when he left, he took all the light with him, plunging me into a perpetual twilight of self-doubt and regret. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of Sarah getting ready for work, the smell of her coffee a ghost of a life I used to have. She was kind, a quiet pillar of support who never pushed, never pried. She just left a mug for me on the counter and a sticky note on the fridge that said something like, "You got this?" or "One day at a time." I didn't believe her. Not really, but the gesture was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. The rest of the day I would drift. I'd stare out the window at the relentless motion of the city, at people with places to go and purposes to fulfill, and feel a profound sense of invisibility. I had been a marketing assistant with a promising future, a girl with a 5-year plan. Now I was just a girl on a couch. The official-looking envelopes started arriving about 10 days in. Sarah would bring them in from the mailbox, her expression a mixture of pity and concern. They were forwarded from my old address, the apartment Marcus was probably already sharing with someone new. The first was a final demand from the credit card company for a card he'd taken out in my name. The second was a notice from a collections agency for a personal loan I hadn't even known existed. Each one was a paper cut to my soul, a reminder of how thoroughly I had been betrayed. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my name, my credit, my good standing in a world that runs on trust. The system, that faceless, bureaucratic giant, was coming for me. Its footsteps were the rustle of stiff paper. Its voice the cold, printed threats of legal action. I was being crushed not by a villain I could confront, but by the weight of a system I had no power to fight. I would stack the envelopes on the corner of the coffee table, unopened. I couldn't bear to look at them. They were monuments to my own stupidity, my own willful blindness. I had loved him so completely that I had handed him the keys to my entire life, and he had driven it straight off a cliff. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe. I was drowning in it. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, another one arrived. This one was different. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and expensive feeling. The return address was a law firm, Abernathy, Wallace, and Finch, in a town I hadn't heard of in 15 years, Silver Creek. The name was a whisper from another lifetime, a place connected by a fragile thread to my father. He had died when I was 13, a sudden heart attack that had ripped the world out from under my mother and me. He was a quiet man, an accountant who loved fishing and old maps. My memories of him were vivid but fragmented, like snapshots in a half-forgotten album. Silver Creek was a place he'd mentioned once or twice, a town near where he'd grown up. My fingers trembled as I slit the envelope open. The letterhead was embossed, the paper crisp. It was addressed to me, Chloe Daniels. It stated, in cold legal language, that I was the sole beneficiary of the Silver Creek Homestead Trust, established by my father, Robert Daniels. According to their records, the trust had dissolved automatically on my 21st birthday, transferring full ownership of the property at 412 Ridge Road directly to Maine. I was now 23. For 2 years, I had owned a piece of land without even knowing it. My heart hammered against my ribs. Felt impossible, a mistake. My father had left nothing behind but a small life insurance policy that had barely covered the funeral and kept my mother afloat for a year. He was a man of modest means. The idea that he had owned property, that he had left it for me, felt like a fantasy. The letter went on. It was a final notice. Because the trust had been dissolved and the property was now in my name, I was responsible for the property taxes. They had gone unpaid for 2 years. The county had issued a tax lien, and the property was scheduled to be sold at public auction in 30 days. The total amount due, including penalties and interest, was $4,782. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped my throat. For $1,000. I might as well have needed $4 million. I had exactly $112 in my checking account, and a mountain of debt that grew larger with every unopened envelope. The letter was just another cruel joke in a long line of them. A ghost of a gift, snatched away before I could even touch it. But something kept me from throwing it away. A name. 412 Ridge Road. It was a solid thing in a world that had become liquid and uncertain. Place. An address that belonged to me even if only for a few more weeks. My father had done this. For some reason, this quiet, careful man had bought a piece of the world and put my name on it. He had created a secret, a mystery, and left it for me to find. I looked at the phone number at the bottom of the letter. My hand was shaking, but I picked up my phone. I had to know. I had to hear a human voice confirm that this wasn't some elaborate, painful mistake. I dialed the number for Mr. Abernathy. After 2 rings, a calm, steady voice answered. Abernathy. Hello, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My name is Chloe Daniels. I received a letter from you. About a property in Silver Creek. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Ah yes, Ms. Daniels. We've been trying to reach you for some time. The notices were being returned. I moved, I said, the understatement of the century. I'm sorry, I don't understand any of this. My father. He didn't have any land. He did, Mr. Abernathy replied, his tone pragmatic and even. He purchased it 16 years ago. A small parcel about 5 acres with a farmhouse and a barn. He put it into a revocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. The terms were specific. It was to remain in the trust, managed by our firm, until your 21st birthday, at which point all assets would transfer directly to you. It was designed to be a clean transfer, no probate, no complications. But why? My mind was reeling. Why wouldn't he tell me? Or my mother? His instructions on that matter were also quite specific, Ms. Daniels, the lawyer said, a hint of professional sympathy in his voice. He stated that the trust was to be a contingency, his words. He wanted you to have something that was yours and yours alone, a foundation separate from everything else in your life, in case you ever needed one. He stipulated that we were not to make contact until the transfer was complete, in case I ever needed one. The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring through a sudden film of tears. He had seen this somehow. Not the specifics, not Marcus, not the debt. But he had understood that life could knock you down. He had known that his daughter might one day find herself with nothing. And from across the years, from beyond the grave, he had prepared a safety net. A broken-down, tax-delinquent safety net, but a net all the same. The taxes, I said, my voice thick. The auction. Yes, he said. That is the unfortunate reality. The county is not sentimental. You have until the 15th of next month to pay the arrears in full. If you cannot, it will be sold to the highest bidder. I closed my eyes. It was hopeless. And yet, a tiny, defiant spark flickered to life in the cold darkness of my chest. For 2 years, I had been defined by what Marcus had done to me. I was the girl who got left, the girl who got cleaned out, the victim. But this was different. This was from my father. This was mine. It was the only thing in the world that was. "What's on the property now?" I asked. "I haven't been out there in years, Ms. Daniels," Mr. Abernathy said. But the last report I saw wasn't promising. The farmhouse was already in a state of collapse a decade ago. I believe the barn was still standing. It's rural, quite isolated. A barn. The word hung in the air. A barn on 5 acres of land that belonged to me. It was a preposterous, ridiculous, impossible idea. And it was the first thing that had made any sense at all. For 3 days, the idea fermented in my mind. It was a seed of madness or maybe hope. The two felt indistinguishable. Sarah watched me, her brow furrowed with worry as I paced her small living room. The letter from Mr. Abernathy clutched in my hand. "Chloe, what are you thinking?" she finally asked one evening, handing me a bowl of pasta I had no appetite for. "I'm going to go see it," I said. The words came out with more certainty than I felt. "Go see what?" "A pile of rotten wood you can't afford to keep." She wasn't being cruel. She was being practical. She was my friend, trying to protect me from more disappointment. "It's not just a pile of wood," I tried to explain, fumbling for words. It's from him, Sarah. It's the last thing he ever did for me. I have to see it. I have to stand on it. I had nothing left to lose. That was the terrifying, liberating truth. My life in the city was a graveyard of memories I couldn't escape. Every street corner held a ghost. Every cafe a reminder of a promise he'd made and broken. The unopened bills on the coffee table were a daily testament to my failure. Staying here felt like waiting to be buried alive by the rubble of my past. This trip, this insane pilgrimage to a place I'd never been, was the only thing that felt like moving forward. Or at least moving somewhere else. The bus ticket cost me $84, a devastating chunk of my remaining funds. The journey was a slow, grinding transition from one world to another. I watched the gleaming skyscrapers of the city shrink in the grimy window of the Greyhound, their sharp, arrogant lines softening into a distant, hazy mirage. We moved through sprawling suburbs, then anonymous stretches of highway, and finally onto smaller county roads that wound through rolling hills and farmland. The landscape became greener, emptier. The relentless energy of the city was replaced by a vast, intimidating quiet. I spent most of the 7-hour ride with my forehead pressed against the glass, the vibrations of the bus a constant hum against my skull. My fellow passengers were a collection of quiet lives in transit. A young mother trying to soothe a restless baby, an old man in a worn-out baseball cap staring blankly ahead, a group of college kids laughing too loudly in the back. Each of them had a destination, a reason. Mine felt like a question mark. My internal monologue was a frantic tug-of-war between hope and despair. One moment, I would imagine a charming, rustic barn that I could fix up, a place where I could breathe and heal. The next, my mind would conjure images of a dangerous, collapsing structure filled with rats and rot. Another dead end. Another monument to a hope that was foolish and naive. I was chasing a ghost, a memory of a father I barely knew, on the word of a lawyer I'd never met. What if there was nothing there? Or worse, what if what was there was just another burden? Another problem I couldn't solve. Fear was a cold knot in my stomach. The fear of the unknown was sharp, but it was the fear of disappointment that was truly agonizing. I had so little hope left, a single flickering candle. I was terrified this trip would be the gust of wind that extinguished it for good. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden fingers across the fields, the bus pulled into Silver Creek. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a few buildings clustered around it. A gas station with a rusty sign, a diner with a flickering neon open light, a post office, and a handful of storefronts, most of them dark and empty. The air that hit me when I stepped off the bus was different. It was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and pine, a stark contrast to the city's exhaust-choked atmosphere. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets. There was no taxi service. The station agent, a woman with a kind, tired face, told me Ridge Road was a good 5 miles out. Not much out that way anymore, she said, eyeing my small backpack. You got someone picking you up? No, I admitted, feeling a fresh wave of panic. I was hoping to walk. She gave me a look that was part pity, part disbelief. Then she sighed and picked up a phone from behind the counter. Earl, she said into the receiver. Got a young lady here, needs a ride out past the old Miller place. Yeah, Ridge Road. She'll pay you for your gas. She hung up and looked at me. My brother. He'll be here in 10 minutes. Drives a blue Ford pickup. Don't worry, he doesn't talk much. Earl was exactly as advertised. A man in his 60s with a face as weathered as a barn door. He grunted a greeting and threw my backpack in the truck bed. We drove in silence, the truck rattling down a paved road that soon turned to gravel. The last light of day was fading, and the woods on either side of the road seemed to press in on us, dark and mysterious. You from around here? He finally asked, his voice a low rumble. No. My father was a long time ago. He nodded, his eyes on the road. Not many people come back. Most are trying to get out, he pointed ahead. That's Ridge Road. Where to? For 12, I said, my voice small. He shot me a quick, surprised glance. The old Daniels place? Hasn't been anyone out there in 20 years. Place is a ruin. My heart sank. I know. It's mine now. He didn't respond, just made the turn onto an even rougher, unpaved track. The truck bounced and jostled over deep ruts. After another half a mile, he slowed to a stop. This is it. I looked out the window, and my breath caught in my throat. Before me was a scene of profound decay. A thicket of overgrown weeds and thorny bushes choked what might have once been a front yard. Through the tangled mess, I could see the skeleton of a house. The roof had caved in, and the walls had slumped, leaving a jagged, skeletal ruin that looked like the remains of a forgotten beast. It was worse than I had imagined. It was a grave. But then I saw it. Beyond the carcass of the house, set back on a small rise, was the barn. It was huge, far larger than I had pictured. Its wood was a deep, weathered gray, streaked with moss, but its lines were still straight and true. The roof, though patched with rust-colored tin in places, was intact. While the house had surrendered to time, the barn had endured. It stood against the deep purple of the twilight sky, not as a ruin, but as a sentinel, silent, waiting. Thanks for the ride, I said to Earl, my voice hoarse. I handed him a $20 bill, most of what I had left for food. He hesitated, then pushed it back toward me. Keep it. You're gonna need it more than I do. He looked from me to the barn and back again. Good luck, kid, he said, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like compassion in his eyes. He put the truck in reverse and backed down the track, leaving me alone in the deepening darkness. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the countryside settling around me like a heavy blanket. The air grew cold. A sliver of moon rose over the treetops, casting a pale, ethereal light on the scene. Disappointment was a bitter taste in my mouth. What was I doing here? This wasn't a foundation. It was a wasteland. The house was unsalvageable. The land was a jungle, and I was a city girl with $100 and no plan. But my eyes kept being drawn back to the barn. It had a presence, a stoic dignity that the ruined house lacked. It felt solid. While everything else in my life had crumbled, this structure, built by hands long since turned to dust, was still standing. I pushed my way through the thorny brush, my jeans catching on brambles. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled several times before I reached the clearing in front of the barn. Up close, it was even more imposing. The double doors were massive, built of thick planks bound with rusted iron hinges. I put my shoulder to one and pushed. It didn't budge. I tried the other. Nothing. They were swollen shut, sealed by years of rain and neglect. A wave of despair washed over me. I had come all this way only to be locked out. I sank to my knees in the damp grass, the fight draining out of me. It was over. This was it. the final, pathetic act of my foolish quest. I was going to have to walk back to town in the dark, beg the bus station agent to let me sleep on a bench, and use my last few dollars to get a ticket back to the city, back to Sarah's couch, back to the crushing weight of my failures. I buried my face in my hands, a sob catching in my throat. It was too much. The betrayal, the debt, the loneliness, and now this final, mocking symbol of a hope that was never really there. I don't know how long I knelt there, but eventually, the wave of self-pity subsided, leaving behind the cold, hard bedrock of desperation. I wasn't done yet. Couldn't be. I got to my feet and began to circle the massive structure, running my hands along the rough, weathered siding. The moonlight was just bright enough to see by. The back of the barn was a solid wall of wood, but as I rounded the far side, the side hidden from the road, my fingers brushed against the edge of a doorframe. It was a smaller door, a normal-sized human door, tucked away under the eaves. It had no handle, just a small hole where a knob used to be. I put my fingers in the hole and pulled. The wood groaned in protest, but it moved. It scraped against the frame, then swung inward with a low, mournful creak, opening into a square of perfect, impenetrable blackness. I hesitated at the threshold. The air that wafted out was thick and cool, carrying the scent of 100 years of history. Old hay, damp earth, dust, and something else, something metallic and faint. It smelled like the past. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and switched on its flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, and I stepped inside. The beam of my phone's flashlight felt pathetically small in the cavernous space. The interior of the barn was vast, the ceiling soaring up into a cathedral of darkness far above me. Huge, hand-hewn beams, thick as my body, crisscrossed the empty space, supporting a roof I couldn't even see. Motes of dust, ancient and undisturbed, danced in the cone of light like tiny stars. The floor was packed earth, firm and cool under my feet. The silence in here was different from the silence outside. It was a heavy, profound quiet, the kind that absorbs sound. Felt sacred. I walked slowly toward the center of the space, my light beam sweeping across the empty expanse. It was mostly empty. A few rusted farm implements leaned against a wall. A pitchfork, a scythe, their wooden handles smooth with age and use. In one corner, a pile of rotting harnesses lay in a tangled heap. It was a place built for work, for purpose, that had been sleeping for a very long time. My light caught on something in the far corner, a large, dark shape covered by a heavy, canvas tarp. It was the only thing in the vast, open space that seemed deliberately concealed. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different from the random detritus of a forgotten farm. This was intentional. I approached it cautiously. The tarp was thick and stiff with age, coated in a fine layer of dust and grime. It smelled of oil and canvas. I grabbed a corner and pulled. It was heavier than it looked, and it came away with a cloud of dust that made me cough. Underneath was not what I expected. There was no old tractor, no forgotten piece of farm equipment. Instead, there was an old, battered workbench, and beneath it, a heavy, dark green metal footlocker. It was the kind of thing you see in old army movies, solid and serious, with heavy-duty latches on the front. And it was secured with a thick, brass padlock. My breath hitched. This was it. This had to be it. Why else would someone hide a locked box in the corner of an abandoned barn? My father. He must have put it here. A frantic search began. I looked all over the workbench, my light darting into every dark corner. I ran my hands over the rough-sawn planks, feeling for a hidden compartment, a loose board. Nothing. I checked the pockets of an old work coat hanging from a nail on the wall. Just dust and a petrified acorn. I looked around the footlocker, on top of it, behind it. The lock was solid, impassive. Frustration mounted, sharp and acidic. To be so close, to have this tangible mystery right in front of me, and to be thwarted by a simple lock. I was tempted to find the old scythe and try to smash it open, but I knew it would be useless. The lock was too strong, the box too solid. I forced myself to calm down, to breathe. My father was a methodical man, an accountant, He loved puzzles, but he was not a man for brute force. If he left a locked box, he would have left a key. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be logical. I went back to the workbench, this time with a new purpose. I wasn't just looking, I was thinking like him. Where would a careful man hide a small, important object? Not in plain sight, but not impossibly hidden either. Somewhere close, somewhere accessible if you knew where to look. I knelt and aimed my light underneath the workbench. The space was filled with cobwebs, thick and sticky. I swept them away with my hand, grimacing. My fingers brushed against the underside of the main plank. It was rough and unfinished except for one small patch. Right in the center, my fingers found the smooth, cool surface of what felt like tape. My heart leaped. I angled my phone so the light hit the spot. There, held in place by 2 strips of yellowed electrical tape, was a small, flat, brass key. Tied to it with a piece of string was a small cardboard tag. I carefully peeled the tape away, my fingers clumsy with excitement. The key fell into my palm, cold and heavy. I turned the tag over. On it, in my father's neat, familiar handwriting, were 2 words. For Chloe. Tears sprang to my eyes. It was a message in a bottle, a signal fire lit 16 years ago, just for me. He had known. He had trusted that one day, I would find this, that I would need it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the padlock. It slid in with a satisfying click. I turned it. The mechanism was stiff, but it gave way with a solid thunk that echoed in the vast silence of the barn. The shackle sprang open. I took a deep breath, my flashlight beam trembling on the lid of the footlocker. I lifted the heavy latches and slowly, reverently, raised the lid. The hinges groaned. A sound like a sigh. I peered inside. For a moment, I felt a pang of disappointment. There was no treasure, no stacks of gold bars, no family jewels. The box was filled with paper, neatly bundled stacks of documents tied with string. And on top of it all, 2 thick envelopes. One was a standard business envelope, sealed and heavy. The other was a softer, cream-colored one, with my name, Chloe, written on the front in that same steady hand. Next to the envelopes was a small, heavy object, carefully wrapped in a piece of dark blue velvet. I reached in and picked up the cream-colored envelope. My name, written by him, felt like he was in the room with me. I sat down on the dusty floor, my back against the cold metal of the footlocker, and carefully broke the seal. Inside were several pages, filled with his dense, slightly slanted script. I angled my phone to get the best light and began to read. My dearest Chloe, it began. If you are reading this, then 2 things have happened. First, you have found your way to this old barn, which means you are at least as clever and stubborn as I always hoped you would be. Second, it means that you needed to. And for that, I am so sorry. I bought this place for you the year you turned 7. You had just lost your first tooth and you were terrified of the tooth fairy, convinced she was a thief. You hid the tooth in your little jewelry box and slept on it. You wanted to protect what was yours. I was so proud of you. I saw in you a strength, a fierceness, that I worried the world would try to knock out of you. I wanted you to always have a place to hide your treasures, a place that was yours and yours alone, that no one could take away. I know this place isn't much to look at. The house was a ruin even when I bought it. But the barn is strong. The bones are good. I always thought of it as a foundation, something to build on, or just a place to stand when the ground is shaking everywhere else. I am writing this because my time is running short. My heart is not as strong as it used to be, and there are things I never had the courage to tell you or your mother. I have made mistakes in my life, Chloe. I wasn't always the quiet, steady man you knew. I took risks I shouldn't have, trusted people I shouldn't have. I lost a lot of money once, a long time ago, in a bad investment. It nearly broke us. I spent the rest of my life trying to be safe, to be careful, to make up for it. Maybe I was too careful. Maybe I was just scared. This place, this trust, was my one last gamble. A secret investment in you. I set it up so that it would become yours automatically with no one else knowing. A hard reset button for your life, if you ever found yourself in a situation like the one I faced. A place to start over, with no history and no debts but the ones to the land itself. I hope you never have to use it. I hope you are reading this as a successful, happy woman, and this is just a curious relic from your eccentric old dad. But my gut tells me that's not the case. My gut tells me you're here because you're in trouble. Whatever has happened, please know this. It is not your fault. The world is harder than we admit. People fail. We get knocked down. The only thing that matters is whether we get back up. This barn, this land, this is me trying to give you a hand up. There is more in this box. Things that are more complicated than a piece of land. Things that come with a choice, a heavy one. I am sorry to lay this burden on you, but I trust you to carry it. You were always stronger than you knew. Whatever you choose, please live. Live fully. Be brave. And know that your father loved you more than words can say. I finished the last line, and the tears I had been holding back finally came. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking love. I cried for the father I had lost, for the man I was only just now getting to know. I cried for the secret he had carried, for the fear he must have felt. And I cried with a profound sense of gratitude for this impossible gift, this message of love sent across time and space, delivered to me in my darkest hour. He saw me. In a world where I felt invisible, my own father had seen me, truly and completely. He had not abandoned me. He had been protecting me all along. I sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in my hand, the dusty air of the barn filled with the ghost of his presence. The numbness that had encased my heart for weeks began to crack. And through the cracks, something new and fragile began to push its way out. Felt like hope. If you have ever received a message from the past that changed everything, a letter, a photograph, a memory that rewrote your entire history, I need you to know you're not alone. We're a community here of people who understand what that feels like, how it can both break your heart and put it back together again all at once. Take a second and hit that like button if this is hitting you right now. Your story matters. Now, let's get back to what else was in that box. After the wave of emotion subsided, a new feeling took its place. Curiosity. A deep, burning need to understand the rest of his message. Things that are more complicated, he had written. A heavy choice. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my jacket and turned my attention back to the contents of the footlocker. There was the second envelope, the standard business one, and the velvet-wrapped object. But underneath them were the bundles of documents. There were at least a dozen of them, each an inch or two thick, bound with aging string. I picked up the top bundle. It was a stack of ledgers and printouts. The paper was that old dot matrix printer paper with the perforated edges. The columns of numbers meant nothing to me at first, but the name at the top of one of the pages made me freeze. Northwood Development Group. I knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. Northwood was a real estate behemoth. They built gleaming condo towers, sprawling suburban communities, massive shopping centers. Their logo was plastered on construction sites all over the region. They were powerful, untouchable. And they were the company my father had worked for as a mid-level accountant for the last 10 years of his life. I untied the string and started flipping through the pages. It was a confusing jumble of internal project codes, expense reports, and payment authorizations. But as I looked closer, I started to see a pattern. My father had used a red pen to circle certain entries, to connect transactions from different projects with hand-drawn lines. He had made notes in the margins in his tiny, precise script. Words like Shell Corp, inflated invoice, kickback, land trust anomaly. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just accounting. This was a roadmap of a crime. My quiet, careful father, the man who spent his evenings doing crossword puzzles and tying fishing flies, had been a secret investigator. He had been documenting a massive fraud scheme from inside one of the most powerful corporations in the state. I frantically opened another bundle. This one contained photocopies of bank statements from offshore accounts, incorporation papers for shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, and annotated maps of undeveloped land parcels. One of the maps was of Silver Creek and the surrounding county. Dozens of parcels were highlighted in yellow. My father had noted the dates of sale and the ridiculously low prices they were purchased for, all by different anonymous LLCs. My own little 5-acre plot was a small, unhighlighted island in a sea of yellow. He hadn't just stumbled upon a fraud. He had uncovered a systematic, long-term plan to secretly buy up huge swaths of rural land for pennies on the dollar, likely in advance of some major new highway or development project the public didn't know about yet. They were bleeding their own company dry with fake invoices and laundering the money to buy the land, positioning themselves to make a fortune when it was eventually rezoned. My hands were shaking. This was the mistake he'd written about, not some youthful bad investment. Uncovering this. I reached for the second, thicker envelope. My name wasn't on it. It was just sealed. I tore it open. Inside was another letter from him, along with a small, cheap-looking tape recorder and a single microcassette. The letter was shorter, more direct. Chloe, it read, if you've figured out what those documents are, then you understand the danger. I found this by accident. A misplaced file, an entry that didn't add up. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I spent a year gathering this information, making copies, tracing the money. I thought I was being careful. I thought I could be an anonymous whistleblower, that I could hand it over to the authorities and walk away clean. I was wrong. They found out I was digging. I was called into a meeting, not with my direct boss, but with 2 men from their legal department. They were not lawyers. They were smiling sharks. They didn't threaten me directly. They didn't have to. They talked about my family. They talked about you. They mentioned your school, your ballet lessons. They made it clear that if this information ever saw the light of day, the consequences would not just be for me. They would be for you and your mother. They own people, Chloe. Cops, politicians. There was nowhere to go. So I stopped. I told them I had been mistaken, that I had misunderstood the files. I backed down. I played the part of the scared little accountant, and they let me. But I couldn't destroy this. My conscience wouldn't let me. It felt like burying the truth alive. So I buried it here instead. In this barn. On this land that they didn't know existed. The tape in this envelope is a recording of that meeting. I had a recorder in my pocket. It's my only proof of the threat. I don't know what you should do with this. I truly don't. The men I met with that day are likely still there, still powerful. Exposing this would put a target on your back. Could destroy you. Maybe the safest thing to do is burn it all. Take the barn, sell the land, and disappear. Use the money to build a new life far away from here and never look back. There would be no shame in that. It is what any sane person would do. It is what I did. I chose to protect you. But I also know that justice is a rare and precious thing. And right now, it is sitting in a metal box at your feet. I'm sorry. I am so sorry to leave you with this impossible choice. It is a coward's legacy. But it's the only one I have. I dropped the letter. My whole body was trembling. This changed everything. My father hadn't died of a random heart attack. He had died of a broken one. He had lived his last years in fear, silenced, carrying this terrible secret to protect his family. The quiet, unassuming man was a facade, a shield he had put up to hide the terrified, brave man underneath. Finally, I reached for the last object in the box, the small, heavy item wrapped in blue velvet. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a key, old, ornate, and heavy, a safe deposit box key. Taped to it was one final, folded note, for words in his handwriting. The rest is there. And below that, a final sentence that would echo in my head for days. Live quiet or make them pay. The choice is yours, sweet pea. The silence of the barn pressed in on me. It was no longer a peaceful, sacred silence. It was the silence of a tomb, the silence of a secret held for 16 years. I was sitting in the middle of a conspiracy, holding the evidence of a crime that had, in a very real way, killed my father. And he had left the final move to me. The weight of it was crushing. I wasn't an investigator. I wasn't a hero. I was a broke, heartbroken 23-year-old hiding from debt collectors. Marcus had taken my money and my dog. These people, Northwood Development, had taken my father's life. The scale of it was dizzying. My first instinct was pure, primal fear. Burn it. He said I could burn it. I could take the key, find out what was in the box, and run. Disappear. No one would ever know. I could escape the debts, escape Marcus's shadow, escape this whole mess. It was the sensible choice. The sane choice. The choice my father himself had made. To live quiet. I stood up, my legs unsteady. The beam of my phone cut a nervous, twitching path across the floor. I imagined it. A small fire in the middle of the packed earth floor. The ledgers turning to ash, the tape melting, the truth vanishing into smoke. It would be so easy. Clean break. But then I looked at the letter in my hand. You were always stronger than you knew, his words. His faith in me. He had backed down to protect me. He had lived his last years in a prison of fear for my sake. If I burned this evidence, I wasn't just choosing safety. I was validating the threats of those men in suits. I was letting them win. I was letting them get away with what they did to him. I sank back to the floor and I broke. The grief I felt for my father was a raw, physical agony. But it was tangled up with a new emotion. Rage. A cold, hard fury that burned away the fear. They had silenced him. They had taken his voice, his courage, his life. They were not going to do the same to me. I sat there for hours as the moon climbed higher in the sky. The footlocker opened before me like a wound. I thought about Marcus and his petty thievery. It was humiliating, painful. But this was different. This was systemic. This was evil. Marcus had stolen my possessions. Northwood had stolen my father's soul. The choice became clearer and clearer as the night wore on. Living quiet felt like a betrayal. Felt like dying alongside him. The other path, the path of fighting back. It was terrifying. It was a dark, unknown road. But it was the only one that felt like living. It was the only way to honor the man who had secretly fought for justice and who had believed, even in his final days, that his daughter was strong enough to finish the fight. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a text from Sarah. Are you okay? Where are you? I looked around the dark barn, at the box of secrets, at the key in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I knew the answer to that question. I typed back, I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm at the beginning of something. The next morning, I called Mr. Abernathy. My voice was different. The hesitant, whispery tremble was gone. It was replaced by a calm, steady resolve I hadn't felt in years. Mr. Abernathy, I said. It's Chloe Daniels. I have a few questions. Of course, Ms. Daniels. How can I help? The tax auction, I said. Who is likely to buy the property? There was a pause. Well, that's public information. The most interested party, the one who has been acquiring most of the neighboring parcels, is a holding company called Ridgeback Properties, LLC. I've never heard of them, I said, my heart starting to pound. They're a subsidiary, he explained, of the Northwood Development Group. The confirmation landed like a stone in my stomach. Of course, they wanted to swallow up the last little piece of the puzzle, the tiny island my father had hidden in their sea of acquisitions. They probably didn't even know who owned it. It was just a loose end to be tidied up. Mr. Abernathy, I said, choosing my words carefully. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to pay the back taxes, what would be the absolute deadline? The close of business on the 14th of the month, he said. That's Friday of next week. $4,782. Certified check or cash only. And what if I wanted to sell to Northwood before the auction? I asked, testing the waters. Would they be interested? Oh, almost certainly, he said, his voice taking on a more practical tone. It would be cheaper and cleaner for them than the auction process. They'd likely offer you a fair market value, maybe $10,000, $15,000. It would be a quick way to resolve your tax situation and put some money in your pocket. I could even facilitate the offer for you, if you like. There it was, the easy way out.
$15,000.
It was a fortune. It would pay off Marcus's debts, Get me a security deposit on a new apartment. Give me a fresh start. Live quiet. The offer hung in the air, shimmering and seductive. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. The relief, the freedom. Then I thought of my father's face, the quiet sadness in his eyes that I had never understood until now. I thought of the smiling sharks in the boardroom. "No, thank you, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice firm. "I won't be selling. I just needed to know my options. Thank you for your time." I hung up before he could respond. The choice was made. There was no turning back. The nearest bank branch listed on the safe deposit box paperwork was in a larger town about an hour's drive from Silver Creek. Earl's sister at the bus station arranged another ride for me, this time with a chatty mail carrier who was heading that way. The key felt heavy and hot in my pocket the entire trip. The bank was an old, grand building with marble floors and teller cages made of polished brass. It felt like a temple of money. I felt small and out of place in my dusty jeans and worn-out jacket. I presented the key and my ID to a severe-looking woman behind a desk. She examined my driver's license, then the key, then me, her eyes lingering on my shabby clothes. After a long, silent appraisal, she nodded curtly and led me through a massive circular vault door into a quiet, climate-controlled room lined with thousands of small metal doors. She used her key, then mine, and pulled out a long, narrow metal box. She placed it on a small table in a private viewing cubicle and left, closing the door behind her. I stared at the box for a full minute, my heart pounding. This was the last piece of the puzzle. "The rest is there," he had written. I lifted the lid. Inside there was another tape, a backup of the meeting, and more documents, originals this time, not copies. But that wasn't what made me gasp. Underneath the papers, filling the rest of the box, were stacks of cash. $100 bills, neatly wrapped in paper bands. Counted one. $10,000. There were 10 bundles. $100,000. I sank into the chair, my head spinning. Where had he gotten this? It had to be the money he'd lost in that bad investment long ago, the money he'd finally managed to recoup, scraped together and hidden away. It wasn't stolen money. It was his life's savings, reclaimed. He hadn't put it in a bank account where it could be traced or seized. He had put it here, in a place only I could find. This wasn't just a safety net. It was a war chest. It was enough to pay the taxes 10 times over. It was enough to hire a lawyer. It was enough to live on while I fought. It was his final, most powerful gift. A declaration of faith in me, paid for in cash. I took out $5,000, my hands shaking as I counted the crisp bills. I put the rest back, locked the box, and walked out of the bank into the bright sunshine, feeling like a different person. The next day, I walked into the county clerk's office. It was a small, stuffy room that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a nameplate that read Doris, looked up at me without interest. "I'm here to pay the back taxes on the property at 412 Ridge Road," I said, my voice clear and steady. She sighed and began typing into her computer. "Daniels, Chloe. Yeah, that one's set for the auction block next week. You know the amount. $4,782, I said, pulling the thick wad of cash from my pocket and laying it on the counter. Her eyes widened. She stared at the money, then at me. "It has to be exact," she said, as if hoping I'd be a few dollars short. "I have it," I said, "and I'd like a receipt." As she was slowly counting the bills, 2 men in well-tailored dark suits walked into the office. They exuded an aura of expensive confidence. They glanced at me, a quick, dismissive look that took in my worn clothes and messy hair, and then turned their attention to the clerk. "Doris," the taller one said, his voice smooth and proprietary, "we're here to file the pre-auction intent to bid for the Ridge Road parcel. The one from the Daniels Trust." Doris didn't look up from her counting. She finished, ran the bills through a machine, and then slowly, deliberately began to stamp a series of documents. "Well, you're too late, gentlemen," she said, a tiny, triumphant smile playing on her lips. The men stared at her. "What do you mean, too late?" The auction isn't for a week. She slid a stamped receipt across the counter to me. I mean, the lien has been satisfied. The property taxes are paid in full. As of 30 seconds ago, the property is no longer in arrears. She looked at me. It's all taken care of, honey. The two men turned and stared at me, really looked at me for the first time. The dismissal in their eyes was replaced by a confused, frustrated glare. They saw a young woman with nothing, and they could not compute what had just happened. They didn't know who I was, or what I had just done. They didn't know I was Robert Daniels' daughter. They didn't know I was holding their entire corrupt world in a rusted metal box in an old barn. And in their eyes, I saw the first flicker of fear. I picked up my receipt, folded it neatly, and put it in my pocket. "Thank you, Doris," I said. I walked past the two men, my head held high, and stepped out of the courthouse and into the rest of my life. The victory was small, silent, and intensely personal, but it felt like an earthquake. I hadn't just saved a piece of land. I had reclaimed my name. I had taken my stand. I walk the land every morning now. It's been 3 months. The path from the road to the barn is clear, the thorny brambles cut back. I've started the Herculean task of clearing the land around the collapsed farmhouse, piling up the rotten wood, pulling the tenacious weeds. The work is hard. My hands are calloused, and my muscles ache at the end of every day. But it's a good ache. It's the ache of building something, not being broken by it. The barn is my sanctuary. I've swept it clean, patched the smaller holes in the walls where the wind used to whistle through. I bought a cot, a small camp stove, and a solar-powered lantern. It's my home. It's sparse, it's cold some nights, but it's mine in a way no apartment, no shared house, ever was. It's more than just a structure. It's a promise I made to my father and to myself. I haven't done anything with the evidence yet. The box is rehidden, more securely this time. The choice he gave me, live quiet or make them pay, was not a simple, one-time decision. It's a question I live with every day. I've used some of the money to hire a lawyer, not a small-town real estate attorney, but a sharp, hungry investigative lawyer from the city who specializes in corporate malfeasance. We are moving slowly, carefully, building a case that is ironclad. My father did the reconnaissance. I'm building the army. Some days the fear is still there. I see a dark sedan driving too slowly down the main road in town and my heart seizes. But the fear no longer owns me. It's just a reminder of what's at stake. I've come to understand what my father meant by home. It's not the four walls of a house or the address on an envelope. Home is the place where you decide to stop running. It's the piece of ground you're willing to fight for. It's the commitment to a truth, even when it's dangerous. My father couldn't fight, so he gave me the ground to do it for him. His sacrifice wasn't an act of abandonment. It was the ultimate act of empowerment. He didn't just give me a barn. He gave me back my strength. He gave me a purpose. My story isn't over. In many ways, it feels like it's just beginning. The fight against Northwood will be long and difficult, and I don't know what the outcome will be. But I've learned that the most important victories aren't always the loud, public ones. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply choosing not to be a victim anymore. It's finding a place, however broken, and calling it your own. Sometimes the greatest gifts we receive don't look like gifts at all. They look like hard work. They look like a collapsed roof and a field full of weeds. They look like a fight we're not sure we can win. What did this story teach you about home, or about the legacies people leave behind? Let me know in the comments below. I promise I read every single one, because your stories matter. And if you want to be part of a community that believes in second chances, that believes in fighting for what's right even when it's hard, make sure you subscribe. Because we all have a barn somewhere, a place worth fighting for. We just have to be brave enough to find it.